I never thought that an old sidewalk could become the center of months-long conflicts in this small neighborhood. But as it turns out, things that seem trivial can ignite hidden battles no one ever expected. My story begins on a freezing winter day when I moved to Trembling Hands. It was a peaceful neighborhood, but beneath the surface, there were underlying tensions. One of the most prominent figures was Karen, a middle-aged woman who proudly declared herself the guardian of the neighborhood. Karen was the type of person who never overlooked a single detail in the lives of those around her. She watched every activity in the neighborhood with sharp, judgmental eyes. If someone dared park their car in front of her house, she would appear instantly, as if a secret alarm system had been implanted in her brain. "How dare you park on my sidewalk?" she shrieked, her piercing voice echoing through the street. By law, Karen had no claim over the sidewalk outside her property's fence, but that didn't stop her from harassing everyone. That day, the snow was falling thick. My moving truck, loaded with countless boxes, stopped in front of my house. It was my family's first day in our new home right next to Karen's. And, as expected, she stormed out like a tornado, yelling, "You can't park here. This is my sidewalk. Get your filthy truck out of here immediately." I turned to her, surprised, but maintained a friendly smile. "Hello, ma'am. Tomek, your new neighbor. Sorry, but did you just say this is your sidewalk?" "That's right. I won't allow anyone to park here." "Oh, I didn't know that, ma'am. But I'd really appreciate it if you could let me park here for just a little while so I can unload my stuff easily." I had hoped for a bit of courtesy, but instead, Karen shot me a look full of judgment. She scanned me from head to toe, her eyes brimming with hostility. It was clear she didn't like me. Maybe it was because new residents were rare in this neighborhood. "Absolutely not. This is my sidewalk, and I don't want to see your damn truck here for another second." I sighed. Not exactly the warmest welcome from a neighbor, but I didn't want to escalate things on my first day, so I moved my truck a little further down past my house to compromise with her. What do you think that was the end of it? Not a chance. For some reason, Karen simply did not like me. The following days weren't easy. One weekend morning, I was enjoying a hot black coffee while browsing my laptop when I saw an email notification. The subject line immediately raised my suspicion: HOA violation notice for neighborhood disturbance. I was baffled. What the hell? I clicked on the email, and within seconds, 100 questions popped into my head. Parking illegally on the sidewalk in front of Karen's house, $100. Failing to clean leaves in front of my yard, $50. Improperly hanging a flag on my balcony, $75. Placing my trash bin in an unapproved location, $30. Disturbing the neighborhood's peace by washing my car in the morning, $40. And the list went on with a bunch of ridiculous fines. That's when I realized there was no real HOA. This was nothing more than an organization manipulated by a single person, Karen. What stood out more than the absurd fines was the poorly written, uninformed nature of the notice. I scoffed and shook my head. Parking in front of Karen's house. I hadn't done that since she first warned me. The leaves in my yard, what did that have to do with the HOA? I never even hung a flag. My trash bin was exactly where it was supposed to be. And washing my car in the morning? Since when was that a crime? It was too obvious this was a game Karen was playing to make things difficult for me. I decided to send an email to the HOA, requesting them to provide evidence of my violations. They didn't respond. Clearly, this was a system manipulated by people like Karen, someone who abused power in an utterly ridiculous manner. Karen seemed to thoroughly enjoy tormenting me. Every morning she stood on her porch, staring at me as I left, as if to make sure I didn't commit any further infractions. Sometimes I even caught her taking pictures of my car with her phone, as if she were gathering evidence to file yet another complaint. One morning, just as I was opening my car door, she appeared on her front steps, arms crossed, shaking her head in disapproval. "You've violated the rules again." I had asked her multiple times to provide clear evidence for her accusations, but instead of responding, she just kept sending more violation notices. Worse still, if I didn't pay the fines on time, the amount would automatically increase exponentially, making the total more and more absurd. At first, I tried to endure it. I wanted peace. I didn't want to argue with a troublemaking neighbor like her. Reluctantly, I paid the fine, thinking that if I complied, everything would end. But no, she only pushed further. A few days after I paid the first fine, Another letter appeared in my mailbox. This time the fine had doubled for a repeat offense I had never committed. I gritted my teeth, grabbed the notice, and marched straight to Karen's house. "What the hell are you doing?" I held the violation notice up in front of her when she opened the door. "I already paid the fine, and yet you keep this up?" She smirked. "You think just because you paid once you can escape responsibility? I will continue to fine you if you keep breaking HOA rules." "Then show me the evidence." "I just want proof," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You keep sending me these notices, but you have never provided a single piece of concrete evidence for my so-called violations. I want to see it." She crossed her arms and pressed her lips together. "I don't have to explain anything to you. The HOA has its own rules. If you don't pay the fines, the amount will only keep increasing." "Exponentially increasing?" I scoffed. "I think you're exploiting HOA regulations to force me into compliance. I want to see the official documents." "I have no obligation to provide you with anything. If you can't handle it, you can just leave." She slammed the door in my face. I clenched the paper in my hand, feeling my anger rise. Her goal was obvious. She wanted me out of the neighborhood. But why should I leave? Why should I be the one to move away from the house I had fully purchased with my own money? Filled with fury, I shouted loudly, making sure she could hear me. "Then I'll take this all the way. I'll prove that these fines are completely baseless. If you don't stop, I won't hold back anymore." I decided to see this through to the end. As a federal police officer, I knew the law better than anyone, and I knew that Karen had no authority to enforce these ridiculous fines. The HOA didn't have unlimited power as they thought. It wouldn't be difficult for me to turn the tables on her. One day, I decided to confront the issue head-on. I parked my car right in front of Karen's house, the exact spot where she had first forbidden me from parking. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting. And just as I expected, within 5 minutes she appeared, holding a notebook in her hands. "I already told you you're not allowed to park here," she yelled. I responded calmly, "Is this sidewalk yours? Are you sure?" "Absolutely." "Then you have an obligation to protect and maintain this sidewalk, don't you?" "Yes, I am doing exactly that." "Excellent, she has finally fallen into the net I had set up." "Then clean up the snow on your sidewalk immediately, or I'll sue you for obstructing pedestrians." Karen stared at me in bewilderment. She had never expected to be accused by someone. "I'm an old woman, I can't shovel the snow myself," she retorted in her shrill voice, an argument with no logical basis. "I don't care. You claim this sidewalk belongs to you. Then hire someone to clear it or do whatever it takes to make the snow disappear. If not, I'll report you to the police for deliberately obstructing pedestrians." I calmly threw her own words back at her, the kind of remarks she was used to dishing out but had never had to hear directed at herself. Karen hesitated, but then she stubbornly tried to prove she had no obligation to clear the snow. "I'm not obligated to do what you say." "Oh, or are you just bitter about having to pay a fine, so now you're picking a fight with me?" "Fine, then I'll issue you another fine. You have violated the HOA regulations, you are causing trouble and harassing me, and I will make sure you get kicked out of this neighborhood." Look at that, what a ridiculous reason for issuing a fine. I shook my head and laughed loudly. "You want to fine me? Go ahead. Whether it's 1 ticket or 10, I'm not afraid. I've put up with you for a long time, but this time I won't back down." Karen looked at me in shock. She had never expected that one day I would glare at her with a voice so fearless. She began breathing heavily. She was losing her mind. "How dare you?" Karen screamed, raising her hand to strike me. It wasn't hard for me to catch her hand midair. I pressed each word firmly as if to pierce through her twisted logic. "This sidewalk is public property. I checked the city laws, and there is no rule prohibiting parking here." She shook her head and held up her notebook. "You may have checked the law, but the HOA has its own regulations, and I am on the HOA board. I have the right to ensure this neighborhood isn't disturbed by rule breakers like you." I raised an eyebrow. "Then you should also know that the HOA has no authority to enforce regulations that contradict city laws. I've read all the documents carefully, and there's no clause stating that I can't park here." Karen clenched her notebook tightly, her eyes flashing with rage. "Who do you think you are to challenge me?" I looked straight into her eyes, my voice calm but firm. "I am a citizen with legal rights, and more than that, I am also a federal police officer." Karen froze for a moment, her eyes flickering with hesitation, but she quickly regained her composure. "Do you think you can intimidate me? I don't care who you are. If you continue parking here, I will issue more fines." I smirked. "Then I will file a formal complaint with the city about how you and the HOA have repeatedly issued unjust fines against me. If you keep harassing me, I will work with the authorities to investigate this abuse of power. And this time, it won't just be a personal lawsuit." She turned pale, pressing her lips tightly together. I could see her struggling internally, trying to find a way to retaliate. But this time, I wasn't someone she could bully. I knew this battle wasn't over yet, but at the very least, I had made her back down. At that moment, the sound of a police siren approaching from a distance made Karen freeze. She began to feel the tangible pressure radiating from me. 2 officers stepped out of the police car. They approached and saluted me. Of course they did. I had said I was a senior officer in the ranks of the federal police. Karen hadn't believed that. Karen glared at me, unable to say a word. "Karen, I received a report that you are attempting to obstruct a law enforcement officer." One of the 2 officers stepped forward and questioned Karen. For a moment she hesitated. This was the first time I had ever seen her experience fear. I was just trying to maintain order in this neighborhood, but this man is trying to oppress me. He's the one obstructing law enforcement." Karen still tried to defend herself to the end. At the end of her sentence, she even added some humor. "I'll sue you, Tomek." What an honor for me. She had tried to start a battle she couldn't possibly win. I calmly responded to her. "I will also be filing a complaint with the city about you and the HOA continuously issuing unreasonable fines against me," I continued. "If you keep harassing me, I will work with the authorities to investigate this abuse of power." Her face turned pale, but she was not ready to give up. I knew this battle was far from over, but I was not someone who could be easily bullied. Shortly after, I contacted the city authorities and requested a review of all HOA regulations. It wasn't difficult for the police to gather evidence. They discovered that the HOA had abused its authority and that Karen's fines had no legal standing whatsoever. But I didn't stop there. I collected all the penalty notices Karen had sent me, compared them with current laws, and filed an official lawsuit against her for harassment and abuse of power. I also gathered testimonies from other neighborhood residents who had been victims of Karen's tyranny but had never dared to resist. The residents here had always sought peace and thus never fought back, but when they saw me, a federal police officer, standing up to the HOA, they found the courage to speak out. When the summons was issued, I could see Karen turn pale upon receiving the legal documents. One morning, as I was watering my plants outside, she walked past me, her face hardened, her eyes filled with rage. "You think you can stand against me?" she snarled. "You'll regret this." I crossed my arms and looked her straight in the eye. "I'm not fighting against you. I'm just protecting my rights and those of the other residents in this neighborhood. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about. But if you have, the law will speak for itself." She said nothing more, just mumbled under her breath and walked away. But I knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning. At the trial, my lawyer presented detailed evidence of every unreasonable fine I had received, proving that Karen had abused her position in the HOA to personally harass me. Other residents also began to speak up about how Karen had troubled them in similar ways but had been too afraid to resist. Their testimonies further strengthened my case. The trial lasted longer than I had expected. My lawyer meticulously broke down each unreasonable fine, compared them with legal regulations, and exposed Karen's blatant abuse of power. Neighborhood residents, some of whom had been her victims, also stepped forward to testify. A middle-aged man, Mr. Patrick, recounted, "I was fined for parking my car inside my own garage just because Karen claimed I had parked it incorrectly. I didn't dare object because I was afraid of retaliation." Another woman, Linda, also spoke up. "I was warned for having potted plants in front of my porch, even though they didn't bother anyone. I had to pay the fine just to keep the peace. The HOA under Karen's control has been overstepping its boundaries for far too long." With the mounting evidence, the court quickly reached a verdict. The HOA was ordered to refund all unlawfully issued fines, and Karen was stripped of all her authority in the HOA. Not only that, but she was also penalized for abusing her power and harassing others. When she heard the verdict, Karen froze. She couldn't believe she had lost. I didn't see anger or fury in her eyes, only a sense of loss. After the trial, she rarely left her house. She no longer dared to criticize anyone, no longer had the power to intimidate others. The entire neighborhood shunned Karen, perhaps because no one had ever truly been close to her in the first place. She became a lonely old woman in her own neighborhood. But I didn't care. Karen deserved the downfall brought by her arrogance. I stood on my porch, looking out at the street, which had finally found peace. The battle was over, and I had won convincingly. I had learned that when someone abuses their power, if we don't stand up for ourselves, they will only push further. But when we dare to fight back, justice will ultimately prevail.